Hey everybody, I wanted to do a quick solar tip after I put my last little series up about the way I wired all this up. It kind of dawned on me that some of the things that I took for granted, I guess, is not really common knowledge. And not that I'm assuming anybody that watches this is less than intelligent, but I had to learn at some point, so I figure I'll pass the knowledge forward. Um, if anybody who fools with solar should have at least a basic knowledge of how electricity works, how it comes into your house, how it's split, and all that kind of good stuff. But when it comes into your house, it goes through the main breaker, but it comes in on two legs. Okay, each leg is 120 volts, anywhere from 110 to 120, and each leg feeds, well, not really, but just for visualization purposes, each leg feeds a side of your breaker panel. 110 volts, 110 volts. When in actuality, it's this would be this breaker and this breaker would be the same leg, and then this breaker and this breaker and this breaker, they're opposite. So when you put a 220 volt breaker in, it's coming one leg's feeding one side of it and one leg's feeding the other side of it. So the way I did this is each of these inverters is coming off of a separate leg from my shore power, I guess you'd call it. That way, if I did choose to put a 220 volt breaker in here, then it would work like it's supposed to because I'm getting 120 volts from each leg. Now, however, should the electricity fail and these inverters switch over to battery backup power, which, as you can see, I don't have right now, but I will. If they switch over to battery backup power, it won't work that way. Whatever I have up here running off of 220 volts, like a well pump, it won't power that well pump because these are not synchronized. Now, let me explain that. If you take and put electricity on an oscilloscope, this is what you're going to see. This is 2 seconds, and that's why it's called 60 hertz. It's 60 cycles. 1 cycle, 2 cycle, and that's in 1 minute. So 60 cycles in a minute, 60 hertz. Okay. And AC current stands for alternating current, which means it's positive and then negative. So in the first wave, 120 volts, or positive 120 volts. Second wave, negative 120 volts, and then back up to 0. And then it just keeps doing it over and over again. For your 220 volt appliances, the oscilloscope would look something like this. Because at the same time, you've got a positive 120 volt and a negative 120 volt. You add them together, 240 volts, or 220, however you want to call it. Excuse my crude drawing, I know it's not the best, but same principle, 2 seconds, positive 120 volts, negative 120 volts. And the sine waves are complete opposite. They are polar opposites of each other. So if you had your 220 volt appliance hooked to the same leg coming in, you'd have basically 2 lines here, 2 lines here, nothing opposite. They would be the polarity would be the same. So most of your 220 volt stuff wouldn't even start up that way. So with that understanding, you cannot hook 2 inverters. I got this one hooked to this side of the breaker box, this one hooked to that side of the breaker box. Okay, so they're each feeding a separate leg, but they are not, the sine waves are not synchronized. So it could not start up a 220 volt appliance, such as a well pump. It works just fine now because it's passing the electricity through. All this is basically like a solid, very expensive 1.5 foot extension cord to go from here to out the back of it, without the battery pack anyway. So I wanted to share that because that is not necessarily common knowledge the way that works. I have a very intelligent electrician in my family, and he helped me with quite a bit of this. So I wanted to pass that on, and if it sounded confusing, I apologize. But if you have any questions or you need me to clarify anything, I'll be happy to. Um, I didn't want anybody to look at my setup and think, well, hey, that's my solution for a well pump, because it's not. If you wanted that to run a well pump off of your solar, which is going to be terribly inefficient, you'd be better off running on a generator or getting, a couple of thousand watts of solar panels for it in order for it to keep up. But you'd have to take your inverter and run it to a step-up converter, like a Xantrex Trace 240, I think is the piece of equipment that'll do that. It will convert your single-phase 110 volt power supply into a two-phase 220 volt power supply, and then it'll come out in two legs that you would just feed over to your breaker panel the same way I did this, one leg to one side, one leg to the other, and that will power your 220 volt appliances. It's just not very feasible and not really cost effective to run a 220 volt appliance on solar. So anyway, that's my little explanation with my overly crude drawings. I hope this makes sense to everybody. Like I said, I've had some really intelligent people explain this to me, and I'm hoping I'm explaining it into a way that can be understood. But like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a PM, and I will get back to you. I've answered every single one of them I've ever gotten. So hope y'all have a great weekend, and I will talk to y'all later.